I'm here with Chris, general manager of the San Francisco Shock. Also, what feels like an eternity. Were you the first GM of the San Francisco Shock?
I was not. I was the second one. The first one, I don't know. It was a little bit weird for the shock because we had Brad Lautenbeck, Brett Box, and then we had Jamie that were helping in season one. I came at the end of season one towards stage four, and that's when I brought in Crusty, and then we had the whole coaching staff change with 9K. Junkbook was already on the team at that time, but that's essentially when I joined in with the team.
Nice. And to be fair, it has been a couple of years. To me, at least, I feel like this is a unicorn sighting because I don't remember you being on any interview or anything at all in terms of
Yeah,
just working behind the scenes. And I can tell you, and maybe this isn't the most journalistic practice, but I'll tell you what I heard behind the scenes is
sure.
that you're close to best in class in terms of what general management looks like in the Overwatch League. You're really above board and with everything. But we're also meeting at a time where there are some, controversies going on with the organization. So I thought this is the best time to clear up some stuff. I'm sure you're also looking forward to answering some of those fan questions. But let's set a little bit of the scene. Why did you choose to be so behind the scenes for this long?
Um, I don't know. For me, it wasn't so much more of do I want to be in the spotlight? Do I want to be outside the spotlight? It just kind of happens. I think when I came in season one and we were talking with Crusty and 9K and Junkbuck, at that time I think we were making a lot of strides. We didn't make playoffs, but all the attention kind of went to I guess the people that were already in the spotlight, which is totally fair. Um, but I just never made it an effort to kind of, you know, make some unnecessary noise. Um, it, I think the thing that myself and the coaching staff we see eye to eye is like, if you do the right work, then you'll get credit for it. So that's kind of the thing that I've always lived by. And I mean, yeah, accolades are great, public PR exposure is great, but I mean, it, I don't need it to do my job. So
For sure. Now, I will say, I did an interview with Gator today. He said 95% of a top team's performance is in the building of a staff. Staff and players signing them. My understanding is that you always had a big hand in making a lot of these deals work. So I assume like there's a lot of credits to winning the two championships and also almost winning the third last season, one map.
oh yeah,
Um,
painful. Yeah.
so okay, how would you say, generally speaking, is your attention divided? So you have the San Francisco Shock, but you're not just the general manager of the San Francisco Shock. You are
Correct. Yeah.
also the responsible for the Asian region for NRG, right?
Correct. Yes. So I would say during COVID, well, to preface, NRG, we are a startup, and compared to maybe other leagues around, whether they come from a major corporation, um, in a startup, as I think anyone that knows that working in a startup, you have to wear a lot of hats, and I know that word gets thrown around, but you truly have to do that in a startup, and it's something that I didn't mind. It's something that I was always used to. Um, so during COVID, we had an opportunity to work with um, the region of Vietnam with their League of Legends team, where we had GAM Esports, and that was something I was supposed to be balancing between the Shock and GAM Esports. But with COVID, travel being limited, my role is more like advisory, and then hopefully when COVID cleared up, we can make more strides. Hopefully, bring the DNA from the shock or energy, over there. So, we were really looking forward to that. Unfortunately, COVID kind of took much longer than it did. Um, Everything that we had envisioned didn't really turn out the way that we wanted. and mainly it's because of COVID. But outside of that, working with Energy Asia, with TK and all the other guys over there, it was wonderful. Um, so that was kind of my role at the time, more of an advisory role, trying to share best practices with them, and then kind of move into phase two. But we never got into phase two. So um, outside of that, everything in NRG, whether it be sponsorships, anything with sales related, anything that I can help out here and there, I'm always more than willing to. And I do have experiences in pretty much all the fields related to whether it's like in marketing, sales. Um, I can always contribute. So there'll be random times where Andy and I will have discussions. Like we'll be talking about players and coaches 1 minute, and the next minute we're like, oh yeah, by the way, your friends over at such and such company, hey, maybe we can have a sponsorship then. I'll be like, yeah, I'll get on with it right away. So, there's no time for like that break where it's like, oh, you're dealing with players and coaches 1 second, then right away you're answering calls with, any of your partners or new partners, what it is. Um, but I would say my role at Energy has kind of been that way. Yeah.
For sure. Now, we're meeting at a point in time where the discussion around your team is pretty hot, I would say, especially on social media. The season has started uncharacteristically weak, I would say. It's fair to say for a team of your accolades that you've done in the past. It's also the expectations for this particular roster are really high based on the performance that they had in some other constellations, to be fair, in the past. And there have been some questions regarding the facility and the environment for your roster in particular. So I think it always bears pointing out what the context is of how this worked. So what is the living situation like for the last couple of years for the Shock? Where were they housed and how did that work out?
Yeah, so I'd say kind of staying true to the whole startup, where you always have to stay flexible and always have to be ready to pivot. So instead of going the whole direction of having um, a dedicated practice facility that you see in other companies, we've always made the shift every year, and we do that because every year there are different guidelines that Blizzard has in terms of how they want to operate. Now, obviously, all this kind of had the effect from COVID, but in year one, we were in apartments. We all commuted to Blizzard Arena. I think a lot of teams operated that way. Year two in 2020 or in 2019, we went to the team house, and I think that's kind of the standard that a lot of our fans have. 'Cause, I mean, that house was, it was great.
Yeah.
A lot of guys had a really good time there. I think that's where, if I were to choose a moment that shock bonded the most, it was probably at that team house. Um, and then 2020 happened. We made the decision of swapping back to apartments. The main reason is because, for one, we've retained all our roster, right? You have a championship team. Obviously, you want to retain as much as you want or as much as you can. The number one feedback I got was people kind of felt a little too cooped up. They see each other every single day, and you're bound to just kind of. I mean, it's not really that healthy mentally. So I got the feedback of saying like, they kind of wish they had their own space. So we thought, hey, 2020, we're not even in San Francisco or Los Angeles that much anyway. So let's just get them apartments. And since like 80% is travel anyway, um, we will just, work out of the apartments. And at that time, we had the Energy Castle. So we're like, a few of the times we'll just practice out of the Energy Castle. But since we're traveling anyway, let's stick to apartments. And then COVID happened. And we were forced to just stay at our apartments, which was not the ideal situation. If I had known that we'd be staying, I think, despite what people would have thought, I think team houses would have been the way to go. But we stayed in our apartments. There was a period of time where we also commuted to the Energy Castle. And I know everyone says the castle is like $10 million, or I saw this like Reddit post, and I'm like, no, it wasn't. At that time, it wasn't fully complete, and it wasn't really the ideal place to kind of have our guys practice from, but we just had to adapt. The only reason why it's not magnified as much is because we were doing pretty well. And uh, yeah, we did pretty well. Obviously, that was the year we won our second championship. So all the little things don't get magnified during those times. So after 2020, we're like, all right, what do we think? Do we want to move back to the team house? I think very little like mentioned that they liked the apartments, and then for our three-peat year for 2021, a lot of the guys still preferred apartments. So we're like, okay, we're gonna listen to what our guys feel comfortable, so we're gonna stick to it. Then 2021 came, we had a little shift in our roster, and I still think people did like kind of being in their apartments, but now comes the whole aspect of, hey, it feels like we're going to work every day. Um, so you know, I think 2021 was a pretty rough year for us in terms of results. We never made it to any of the stage tournaments or stage finals, and I think Crusty wanted the guys to kind of stay longer in the practice room, but you had people streaming, and they didn't want to stream in the practice room, so they wanted to kind of go back and forth. Um, and we're just like, okay, apartment's not the way to go, so let's swap back to the team house. So that's why in 2022, we made a lot of changes, and then that's when we got proper Finn, everybody, and we're like, this is kind of going back to our 2019 roots, where you kind of have a new team, and let's kind of get these guys bonding together. So we went back to a team house, and then yeah, I mean, everyone liked the team house and everything, but obviously, some people kind of did express that they would wish to have their own space. So it's the whole same cycle again, right? Um, and that's kind of how we've done things the past 5 years.
For sure. Now, from what I understand, like you were not always in San Francisco with the guys. You also stayed in LA for some of those seasons. Is that right?
Yes. So we've actually never stayed in San Francisco. We've always stayed in LA ever since season one. Um, and the reason why we stayed in LA in 2020 was because when we looked at our schedule, we were like, we're not we're in San Francisco maybe 2 weeks total, and we're in Los Angeles 4 weeks total because of LA Valiant and the LA Gladiators. So we're like, you know what? Since we have the Energy Castle there, it'd be smarter to just kind of have our apartments in LA. Um, but that was kind of what happened. We've always talked about going to the Bay Area, but it's obviously more challenging in terms of just your environment, housing. So we didn't make the shift, and we thought LA was. I mean, we had a lot more options in LA, so that's why we stuck to that.
For sure. Now, this year is my understanding that you wanted to make that move. Was that bound to anything really like local? I know some teams have some local activations, get sponsorships that way, or what was the decision taken?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of people at Energy that agreed to kind of having the guys back in our market. I mean, I personally wanted to as well. I'm just really sad that we couldn't really capitalize off our two championship wins and like celebrate it in San Francisco because of COVID. But when things start to get better, I mean, we did a road trip last year in San Francisco, and even though it's a completely new team and they haven't really proven themselves, we had a lot of people come out. I mean, the community for the shock. Um, I mean, I'm probably biased and I'm just only looking at our market, but man, there are so many people that turn out. And people, and even me, I like to engage with a lot of them. I ask them questions like, "How'd you even know to come out here?" Everyone's like, "Oh yeah, like I supported the shot from day one, or my friends told me about it." But the community aspect is really strong, and we thought maybe this year might be the year to, kind of actually have the shock up in the market and to kind of rebuild the community. And now that, COVID somewhat died down, I'm not saying like you don't have to be worried about COVID, but obviously people don't think about it as much as in previous. So there is a resurgency of like offline events, offline community meetups. So we thought that this would be a good time to kind of reconnect back with our fans.
Sure. Now, you had some issues in the preseason coming over, and at least from socials, we heard like it wasn't necessarily visa bout. What was the problem?
Yeah. So for one, once our season ended, and to to no surprise, I mean we were at a team house last season, and then the always biggest challenge, and this is probably what all the GMs kind of can agree, is you have, I mean, there's no really houses that have short-term leases. In the US at least, and especially in the West Coast, everyone wants at least a 1 year commitment, but the Overwatch League doesn't really last the whole year. So, we also have to be very smart with our finances and what we spend. So, I was lucky enough to have a situation with a home that wanted to adjust to my timeline. So we're like, okay, our season ends around here, and they're like, okay, you can break out of your lease, no penalty. And we're like, all right. And I told them, hey, once the season comes around, our guys really liked your place, and we might come back. So that was the initial agreement. So after 4 months of not occupying that place, the landlords were very adamant about contacting me. They're like, "Yeah, we would love to have you guys back. You guys had so much success at this house." I mean, those homeowners were shock fans after realizing like what we did, right? So that was pretty cool. And then I would say the week of the guys that were supposed to come, and this was like maybe 2 weeks before the pro am, um, the landlords found a new realtor, and that realtor was like on a mission to sell this house. So that realtor pretty much told the landlords, "Hey, don't lease your house. Um, just trust me, and then I'm gonna sell your house for like a massive return." And then what that landlord ended up doing was they ended up blocking me on my phone because we've been dealing with each other, and all of a sudden they blocked me. And then the realtor was like, "Hey, I don't appreciate you contacting our landlords anymore, and just whatever it is, just contact through me. And I'm just letting you know right now, um, they will not be friendly with their terms anymore. You'll have to at least commit to a year. You have to commit to this much money." And I'm just like, it's like night and day. And I'm like, whoa, this was unexpected. So um, as much as it sucked, we had to divert away from our previous place of our team house from last season. We had to pivot to another thing. So we were like, okay, we have another place where um, I don't know if the internet's gonna plan out. I don't know if the electricity is gonna plan out. So we're like, all right, what are our options? And then Corey, our VP of marketing, and for the shock, he had a relationship with our current place out in in San Francisco. And then he came up with the idea, hey, why don't this be the year that we move the shock back to to NorCal, and then let's do a lot of offline events, let's do a lot of community driven events, and let's do what we were supposed to do like a couple of years ago. So um, we asked the guys, we're like, hey guys, there's a situation where we can move to San Francisco. We can't do it right away. It's going to take some time, but in the long run, it's going to be better because you can be more within the community. Versus if we do a team house, I mean, yeah, we stay in LA, but I can tell you, like, it's just playing from home because we don't have as many tournaments this year. We only have two tournaments, one in Korea and one we're not sure where it's going to be, but that's for grand finals. So I told them last year time went by really fast. You guys had fun because we were in Dallas, Toronto, Hawaii. We made all of those. But this year I said there's only, I mean, if you think, but there's only one until grand finals. So that might be a little less motivating for you guys. So we kind of all took a vote, and then everyone thought it'd be more fun to kind of have it in San Francisco. Now, given I said it's not going to be perfect, we're still figuring things out, but in the long run, this should be better. So that's kind of what we decided, and that's why the guys had to play from their homes during the pro-am. Obviously, it wasn't ideal. It wasn't something that we wanted to do, but we just kind of had to adapt to our situation. Um, and the guys did a pretty good job of like kind of sticking it through. And I guess one of the strengths of having this type of roster is they've already had their chemistry. So that was kind of one thing, like that cushion that we had going into this. So and that's kind of like what brought us to our current situation. We were coming out of the. It's not. We weren't just playing out of the hotel. I think I've seen places where, yeah, these guys are playing on the hotel Wi-Fi, and I'm like, no, definitely not. And they're like, yeah, the guys look so miserable. I'm like, yeah, if you're losing, I don't think anyone's gonna be happy. And then when you lose, um, everything starts to get magnified, and we understand. Obviously there's some fault on the management side, but just kind of want to keep it clear. We're not torturing the guys. They're not playing outside of their role. It's obviously not the ideal situation, but it's also what was it? Andy's done a lot to support these guys. I mean, the hotels that they're at is definitely not like your 1-2 star. It's definitely at least a 4 star. And they're being provided with a proper facility where they practice from. We did have internet issues in the beginning, but we fixed those. But yeah, that's kind of the current situation.
Yeah. So just for context, I personally looked into that. I can definitely agree that that hotel is an expensive one, and I would therefore deduce that this wasn't a money thing in the first place.
Yeah.
What was the practice facility like, or where you played?
Yeah. So the practice facility where I can elaborate, it's with our partnership with the Academy Art University. Hence, that's the POG announcement. And I know it's not the announcement that maybe some people were looking forward to, because I know everyone's always talking about new player acquisitions. But the reason why I think it's an amazing announcement is because I think it's one of the first kind in any esports org. And it's no surprise that every org is struggling right now, right? Like that's not a surprise anymore. I think this whole year, we've seen nothing but how teams are struggling, teams are disbanding, not just in North America, but everybody in EU, places in Asia. And the sad thing is we're not finished, right? There's gonna be more more news that we're not gonna be happy about, but that's just kind of the nature of how things are. But the one thing I think we've done pretty well is we've always Andy always likes to stay ahead, and we're always being held accountable to kind of come up with creative ways to whether it's for sustainability or the way to kind of just operate. And I mean, I've always had this passion project with partnering with the university. It always made sense. I mean, the whole aspect of esports, right? When everyone's raising money, they're saying esports is like the next traditional sports. And especially in the US, a lot of traditional sports doesn't just come from pro sports. I mean, a lot of college sports tend to do sometimes even better than pro sports, like college football, college basketball. Um, so in 2019, we partnered with UC Berkeley at the time, mainly for our homestand events. And I always thought, wow, that's actually, we can do a lot with that. We can develop their esports program, maybe even um, like have our coaching staff help out with their coaching staff, help out with their um, scouting, talent acquisition, whatever it is. And then by kind of keep winning or whatever it's building your community, like that would essentially be, I had a vision of like creating our esports department as like Alabama's football team, like the University of Alabama's um I mean their football program is beyond. I mean, their head coach alone just brings in so much revenue for the school and so much talent. And I thought, that's something that could work with esports. Like if we partnered with a university, I think we can not only just, you know, have like community, but kind of build like a long-term program where it's not just like a community-driven program, but like where people would actually want to be part of this, where people not only want to win, but they would actually want to immerse themselves in like the whole culture of it. Um, so it was always a passion project of mine, and then we talked about it in Corey, having relationships with a lot of the universities in San Francisco. The conversations with the Academy of Art director and their faculty, it just kind of worked out, and they were willing to support our vision, and we were willing to kind of build out their program as well. So that's kind of where we are. We are at the Academy of Art University's their esports lounge, playing out of there. And it's just the beginning, but we are definitely gonna have more community-driven events out here. We're gonna try to have some matches out here where not necessarily do we invite other teams, but it'll just be like our team playing against whatever team, and it's like combining your matches with a watch party, right? Except your fans can actually see the players and they can interact with them after the match, and we think it's going to be a really cool project.
Sure. Can you describe, just like for clarity's sake, so what is the setup like? Are these players now in the dorms and you're playing out of the facility or a couple of rooms that you have at the university on the campus, or what is the situation?
Yeah, so to clarify the whole hotel situation, it was more of we had to put them in hotels because we didn't have a agreement, and with agreements, it takes long. I mean, the whole administration process of it took longer than we expected. But the Academy of Art University was being nice enough to be like, hey, we can't house you right now, but we'll lend you our practice facility. So that's kind of what was happening before. But now we're in a situation where we got the agreement all finished. The guys are in dorm rooms now, and they are playing. I mean, they're commuting. The Academy of Art provides like a shuttle bus for these guys, so they're safely transported. Um, and they're in a practice facility where, I mean, they have systems better than the systems that we've used during grand finals and playoffs. So, you know, see no complaints there. But yeah, they've been nothing but supportive of us, so we're very thankful.
Right. I have to ask there as well, because some of the community feedback was, what? They are in dorms? To be fair, the pictures that I've seen have pools in front of them and balconies and whatnot. So what's the actual living situation?
Yeah, so right now, it's the end of the school year. So it was kind of a bit of a transition process where um, they needed to put the guys in the dorm rooms where it's available, right? And it's still the school year. I think there's still like a couple days left, and they needed a temporary place to stay, so we had them there. But they will be moving into more of an apartment style rooms, because I know people were mentioning like, oh, there's no kitchens there or whatnot. Um, but I know it seemed like the community made it seem like it wasn't like a hospitable place, but it was actually it was pretty decent. Obviously not like your 5-star hotel or whatnot, but it was good enough. And I think the guys really liked the food. It was like kind of their first experience like trying I guess school cafeteria food, but then it was actually really good. The guys really liked it. They were actually surprised they had so many options to choose from. Rather, before it was just you only have like one set meal, whether it's like a Korean meal or a Western meal. But here it's like you have like your whole buffet that you get to choose from, and yeah, they were kind of in disbelief. So it was like a little bit of a culture shock for them, which was funny to see. But you'll get some of that content, coming soon.
For sure. Now, still there was some turmoil in terms of like the stability. I assume like when they were still in the hotels, they also didn't have PCs there. Do you think all of this commotion impacted their performance?
I think in the beginning, definitely it's a transition process, because especially with Korean players playing from Korea, they're playing in a some of them are playing in their homes, but O2, they had their own facility, so they get to sleep there, wake up, and then they're right in front of their computers. So that part obviously might have thrown them off a little bit, and also the fact that they got to play the pro-am from Korea, screaming from Korea. So I guess that whole the little bit of mix-up that happened definitely probably had some part, especially in the beginning. Um, but I would say after a couple of weeks, we got adjusted to it. The whole shaky start to the season, I think I mean, obviously there's some fault in us with um, just things kind of being slow here, but it wasn't just us. It's definitely a little bit of everything, whether it's kind of figuring out the best comp, uh, adjusting to the meta. But it was a little. I can't say it was 100% because they're playing from hotels, but it was just more of a situation where it's like a lot of things happening.
For sure. Now, okay, I I thought like when you guys affiliated with O2 Blast, that was sort of locking down the most prolific talent forge, maybe of all time in contenders, maybe at the very least in the last couple of years. So
Yeah.
I have to ask there because I thought the deal that you must have cut there was super interesting, right? You
Right.
you even pushed merch for them and that type of stuff. And in exchange, you received practically the best rookies of the year, of course, in proper.
Yeah.
I think there was probably a lot of a lot of commotion around that particular trade. I think you probably had a lot of competition around proper. But what generally speaking, how did that O2 Blast deal come to be?
Yeah. So that partnership deal happened after all the trades happened. Um, and me and O2 Boss, like we've had a long conversation and relationship because we started with Violet, right? And um, we've had a couple meetups, met him for dinner before, and I think there was a lot of things we kind of saw eye to eye. And then after the proper trade happened, he was looking for ways to elevate his brand. And at that time, we were still even though the Shanghai Dragons won the championship in 2021. The Shock were still the only team that has two titles. And socially, I think our team kills it on every year, no matter what our record is. So the O2 boss really liked just what we were doing inside the game and outside the game. So socially, he loves like our marketing, and inside the game, he knows that there's no other player or no other coach that has been consistent with the team where he feels comfortable sending his players. So actually, he was the one that proposed the whole idea of, hey, what if we make some type of way where we can work together, like through the years? But the only way I can think of is like having an academy team, right? But the Shock used to have an academy team, the Energy Contenders, where we had a lot of people at Energy Contenders that are now in the Overwatch League. Like we had Kevster, um, I mean, at one point I think we had Mirror. I mean,
Roscoe?
there was just yeah, so much. Yeah, there was just so much talent that we had. And actually, we were thinking, man, like if it's Shock versus Energy Contenders, like it would be a good like you know internal scrim, right? So we kind of had it all set. But obviously we had to let our contenders team go. And then I've always been like, hey, like we need like our academy team or we need something. So when this opportunity came, I proposed to him, hey, why don't you guys be our academy team? Um, and in return, we'll try to help you guys, whether it's through social, whether it's through player development, and that's how we kind of came to agreement. Um, and I know like people are like, yeah, like you guys threw the bag at proper and everything. I mean, obviously there was a transaction fee going into it, but it's definitely not the amount that everyone thinks. I think our coaches did a really good job of talking to the players. I've also done extensive. I mean, I went back to Korea, and I went through quarantine for 14 days just to kind of secure our investments. So it wasn't like, hey, here's money, give us proper. It's more of, and you can ask proper, you can ask any of them, but it's definitely um, not a money thing. It was more of, hey, like let's talk. This is our vision. This is how we see a team. This is how we develop players, and I think that really captured them. And we were able to kind of come to agreement. But yeah, it was more of, to sum it up, it was more of, yeah, we got proper in them first, and I think it's mainly thanks to our coaching staff. And then we came up with the whole partnership proposal, and then yeah, it's kind of like how it worked.
you I'm just like connecting some dots in terms of, like you said, you were even open for your coaches to provide some guidance to the university staff and whatnot. I heard through the grapevine at certain points that Crusty was and 9K were sort of doing that already in contenders. Like sometimes they talk to some, like a lot of signing seems to be to also establish relationships with those players years before you actually, ended up signing them, and maybe give them a couple of pointers in terms of how to improve their play. Is that true? Did they, for instance, establish a connection with Proper already beforehand?
Um, to my knowledge, it's I don't think it's like a black and white situation where, hey, we know proper before, we're gonna give you pointers, and this is gonna be your way to come to the shock, right? It's not like they kind of have this development system. It's more of Overwatch League teams, like towards the end of the season when teams get knocked out, you get to scrim with contenders teams. I mean, even our 2019, our first championship team, we scrimmed a lot with Atlanta Academy, and till this day, I really thank Brad for him making his academy team available, because at that time, no team scrimming. It's just us and Vancouver Titans, and I think scrimming with Atlanta definitely really helps. So I really want to thank the academy team and Brad for doing that once again. But during those times, like, people talk to each other, right? Like coaches will talk to each other. They're like, "Hey, that was like an insane play," or like sometimes the players would be like, "Hey, in your opinion, like in these situations, like what should we have done? Should we take high ground? Should we take low ground?" So I think things like that, like you kind of automatically already establish a relationship. And especially like in the Overwatch community, like it's so slow, right? I mean, it's so small, the whole player coaching base. So, I mean, everyone cross paths with each other. So, I mean, that's kind of, to my knowledge, that's kind of how the relationship was set up. 9K in 2021 was playing for the Philadelphia Fusion. So his team scrimmed with O2 a lot. I mean, he told me he would get their butts kicked a lot by O2. Same with the Shanghai Dragons. Because the whole popular thing of why O2 was so strong was like they would be beating the Shanghai Dragons, and that was the year that Shanghai Dragons won. So through that, they would establish a relationship, but I don't think it's the way of like, hey, um, like I'm the coach for the Shock. I'm gonna give you pointers, so you're like my student type of thing.
For sure. Now, was it? I mean, I think those stories of them beating the Shanghai Dragons, of them beating the Philadelphia Fusion and whatnot, that leaves an impression, right? So, did you guys always settle on, okay, we're going to reunite these O2 guys and try to, run it back and actually, bring that potential to the Overwatch League? Or did you source all kinds of different roster building strategies this offseason?
Um, so they're definitely every offseason we always like to kind of theory craft on what should be the next team, and we always like to see things long term. Um, kind of how why Violet was on our team for so long. He was like the guy outside the guys that retired from the Shock. I mean, Violet was a guy that we wanted to build long term with. And then now with Proper Finn, those are the guys that we wanted a long term build with. So with the remaining talent pool, like what realistically can we do to kind of essentially make a new dynasty with the Shock instead of just, you know, going for just one championship and, boom from there. But long term, we thought this was the play. Obviously, there were a lot of great candidates out there, um, but also another thing I think our coaching staff suffered a lot is always making the team atmosphere. Whether and every season till now, I think the Shock we've always had a mixed team. I mean, some years we've had a more Korean dominant team, but we've always had some Western talent in here. And once the first dynasty team, once that all disbanded, like last year, for example, that was our first time creating a team together. Towards the end, great. They all loved each other. It was a great team. I mean, I miss those guys. But you know, I think it's mentally and physically tolling for our coaching staff to kind of not just always think about the in-game stuff, but outside the game stuff. And I could see they were like really exhausted from it, from especially from last season. And I think the decision was, hey, let's make it a little bit less taxing for the coaches. So let's kind of have something where, on a chemistry standpoint, that we can make it easier for everybody. So that's kind of the reason why gathering the O2 best players made the most sense. And plus, we thought, that their talent levels and talent pools all complemented each other really well. So we thought it was a win-win situation.
For sure. Now you touched upon it. You parted ways with one of your longest lasting players, also most winning players in Violet. And there's an interesting framing that I'm just going to steal from Gator, who said
Sure.
Violet is like the LeBron of the Overwatch League. He might not be the absolute best player on his position right now, but you still want him on your team, right? So because he's still good enough to play that. And
Yep.
he also is in one of those special positions where he can cover the main and flex support role that is now converging, and I would argue almost pioneered last season for you guys. So why was the decision taken that Violet would be departing from the Shock?
The conversation with Violet we've had, I mean, we've also talked about this even before our 2022 season. And the one thing, right before we re-signed Violet, even Violet was considering like maybe it's a time for a change. Because once you stick on one team, maybe you lose motivation just because your perspective gets very limited. And I think it's very fair to say when a lot of players go to different teams, they start to learn the whole aspect of perspective. Um, and I think Violet said it in his farewell video, but he was also saying like, he thought it was also a time for change, and it was something that the coaching staff also agreed on as well. Um, that was the main reason. I mean, obviously, we still talk to each other. I mean, after he styled on us, I think last week or a couple weeks ago, like we just like kind of laughed at it, and every time if we lose or something, like I'd message Violet, hey, don't laugh, all right? And he's like, no, no, no. It's like it pains me to see Shock, losing, but I mean, we're still really good friends with each other, but we both had a mutual understanding that it was time for something new. And as much as I hated to let him go, it was a decision that we made as a whole. We realized like we can't satisfy everything that we want, um, but it was the right way to kind of let him go. And I also wanted him to find a right home that suits him comfortably. That's probably the least thing that I can do. So we left on very good mutual terms. I mean, he's with Junbin, his old coach from the Shock in 2019, 2020. So obviously he's comfortable there, and their team's doing great. But I agree with Gator. Violet's one of the um, once in a lifetime type of player. I mean, even I think Super said it on stream back in 2020 or 2021 that Violet's his greatest of all time type of player. Even players that have a lot of disagreements with Violet, they'll acknowledge that like Violet can play really well, not just in his role, but in other roles like DPS, tank. Very small lore for the Shock. There are many times where we're gonna actually put him on tank, and if we put him on tank, then he would have been like one of the only players to play all three roles in the Overwatch League. But it almost came to that in one of the seasons. So
Do you remember
So
when
yeah,
that was?
I gotta say it was probably 2021.
And which
And
hero?
probably, yeah, 2021. And I think last year, because Super's departure was so sudden, we actually thought about putting Violet on. This is before we got Kaluge, right?
Mm,
We're just like, okay, what do we do now, right? And then like all the guys were like, kind of like, yeah, what do we do with Tank now? We're just like, hey, Violet's not bad. He can probably outplay a lot of the players. So I think it was talked about last year, and I know we kind of briefly talked about it in 2021 when we're like still trying to figure things out. But yeah, Violet's one of those guys that can, he's like your super flex.
right. Now, speaking of flexible roles or other players, you had to find someone that steps into those giant footsteps. And you also didn't decide to go with a double flex support solution that some teams go with. You have to have 6 players, you doubled up on tank. So you had to find a main support player that, can play both, and you landed on Vindaim. How did that
Yeah,
come to be?
yeah. So Vindaim was somebody that I think Crusty saw as like very high potential. Also comes with who's one of the main supports that can play Lucio really well. That was on the O2 team. So obviously Vindaim was like a top choice that we had. Um, but most of all, I think Crusty saw a lot of potential in him, and I know he's off to a pretty slow start. I mean, it's kind of like how Violet was when he first started on our team. They're like, yeah, Violet keeps dying and stuff like that. Um, but there's a lot of room for growth there, and it was something that Crusty kind of he was very confident in, and it also comes at the recommendation from proper Finn as well. So yeah, that's kind of how we came to that decision.
Okay. So as I said before, you doubled up on the tank role. And
Yes.
I mean, I now also have the context of what Gator said. I know that the 17 rule probably wasn't the most predictable for you guys going into the season that this would fall. And you had the connection with Junbin beforehand. So how did you decide to land on Junbin and make him the 6th player for your roster?
Yeah. So Gator's absolutely right. That whole 17 rule, who would have thought? We had our eyes set on someone else. Actually, a couple other candidates in different roles. To be frank, but once that 17 rule happened, we're like, wait, if we got Max, and then if we get Junbin, that covers all our tank roles, right? And also keep in mind, last year, obviously, Kaluge was great for us. I mean, I couldn't have. I felt really bad for Kaluge to kind of come in, all of a sudden and flex onto every tank role that needs to be happening on a new game. So I know the whole tank role was like very stressful for everybody last year on the shock. So then, we're like, okay, if we get Max, what are his strengths and weaknesses? And then they were saying, well, Junbin can also cover his weaknesses. Plus, he has uh, a lot more potential. So when that 17 rule came, just like you said, it kind of blindsided us, but it also just made us zero in on Junbin, and it's kind of what happened. But I mean, both Max and Junbin really great players. I mean, I know there's this whole thing on Reddit where Max's win loss rate is much lower than Junbin's, but it definitely doesn't paint the whole picture. Obviously, especially when it comes to preparations and everything. Max is, I mean, Junbin's a great player, but Max is also a phenomenal player as well. It's just, I think we just need some time for it to show.
I gotta ask because the way Gator sold it is like you guys once again performed a magic trick to get the guy to sign the contract and not sign with
Yeah,
ATL. What was the magic trick? Can you like
yeah.
pull the curtain on that?
I'll clarify. It's definitely not the bag. It's definitely not the money.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a little bit of just everything in terms of like, talking with our coaches. I mean, I think for one, when it comes down to it, um, young players always look ways for them to, for longevity or growth, right? They want to be with a team that can help them grow. Other players look for like other like S tier players to play with. Um, but I think over the years, our coaches have developed kind of their pitch in convincing players, and I think that's something that's very unique to the Shock. And I think that's kind of the reasons why we stuck with Crusty for what we're going like 6 years with Crusty now, 4 or 5 years with 9K, and yeah, it's just kind of been our like bread and butter. Um, and definitely I'm really thankful to Crusty and 9K for having that ability, and Andy too. Andy's always so grateful to have. I mean, we think we have the best coaching staff in the Overwatch league. So, but yeah, I can't go too much into detail their pitch, but they obviously have a lot of convincing power. And then lastly, it comes to me, but I'm pretty real. I don't shower them with all these things. If anything, I tell them, hey, if you're coming to this team, there might be some sacrifices you need to make. I just want to tell you that from straight on. I like to keep things real with everybody. That way, when they come here, they're not too disappointed. They're not overly hyped. Um, I just want them to focus on, their main task, which is, to get better and to get better with their team.
For sure. Now, let's talk a little bit about the season, because I think it is fair to say that it is maybe the second slowest start that the Shock has had after season 1. Maybe the slowest start that you've experienced as a general manager. What do you put that to? What do you think? Like, what have you identified as a problem, and do you have solutions?
Yeah. So I think one of the issues. Well, let's start with the whole contenders aspect. I think contenders teams, it's kind of fair to say their flexibility in terms of um, just like hero comps is a little bit not as wide as Overwatch League teams. I'd say in Overwatch League teams you see a lot more wide variety of comps, especially in the West. That's why I think the West is better than APEC. Well, I mean, we'll see again this year. Um, but that's kind of like what we thought like kind of happened is, contenders teams, hero pools are like their compositions that they're used to, much different than Overwatch League players. And also you have Vindaim that used to be on Seoul Dynasty that played in the APEC. So their practice regimen is also really different than with us. So it was this whole period of, you have different, even though they were all from O2 at one point, like the last year, like things changed. I mean, not to mention you have a whole new different game of a 5v5 factor. So we only have the whole background story of O2 was great on a 6v6, but we don't count into the whole variables of we are in Overwatch 2, we're on the 5v5. Plus you have different environments where you have contenders teams on different style of play, and then you have an APEC player on a totally different style of play too. So that's been like the biggest challenge that we had. I mean, obviously it's an excuse, but it's something that we've kind of identified and help trying to understand the players of what the issue is. And that's kind of the general gist of what we think the issue is going on right now. But luckily, it's been getting better. I know we still kind of go one-on-one on weekends, but things have been getting a lot better. And we haven't really given up. And yeah, it's just one of those things where you just kind of need some time. And that's kind of how 2019 Shock 2 was. Stage 1, we were not great at all. We were great in scrims, but we would not just be able to. We were the most unclutch team. I think Monte Cristo said at that time, we were the most unclutch team. And then by the end of the season, we became the most clutch team. So it just takes some time for us.
For sure. Now, I mean, you talked about it. We're in a pretty dire situation as esports generally, and we're probably not past the peak of that problem either in terms of the esports winter. And with that come, shrinking budgets. I think you guys have a smaller coaching staff now. Like usually you had 3 coaches at least. Your roster size also decreased. Theoretically speaking, like other title contending teams have larger rosters. I'm thinking ATL has, I think, 7. Boston has more players. I think a couple of them are also at the minimum size of 6. But generally speaking, there has been at least from the outside, a perception of like a decreased budget. And with decreased budgets, theoretically, there could be decreased expectations for this roster. Is that fair? Did you think, okay, yes, we were one map away from winning the grand finals last year. This year, we're downsizing, and therefore we're also downsizing our expectations.
No, quite the contrary. As I mentioned before, this is the first time we went full Korean roster. I mean, a lot of teams, I think all the top competing teams kind of went all full Korean. But yes, like it's no surprise, not just in Overwatch League, League of Legends. I mean, League of Legends let go of their challengers team. It's kind of like the whole Overwatch League where every team dropped their academy team. That's kind of what League of Legends is going through right now. Valorant too, I assume it's gonna happen, but in all across the boards, like people are slashing, people are getting rid of influencers. Everyone's starting to downsize. So even though we kind of downsized a bit, we kind of kept the core of what makes this team great. So for one, it was a utmost priority to keep, our coaching staff. I mean, obviously we had Cass the last couple of years, did great for us, but he had a better calling in Toronto, so I'm happy for him. I know it's rough for him right now too. We're kind of sharing each other's pains right now, but
similar situation as well, right? With AT
yes,
as a contenders team that isn't performing to expectations, right?
Yeah. So they're still in a group chat together, and every time they lose, all the memes come out. It's just it's funny. But we let go of certain people, and then we wanted to keep we thought instead of building out your roster to 12, we thought it's better to start small and then build out from there. Because, I mean, for one, cost is obviously a big issue. But also, number two, I don't think any coach out there has the capability of controlling all 12 people and making them all happy. I'll tell you, I don't want to go through that again in 2019. I mean, we had 12 superstars, arguably, on the Shock 2019. A lot of people that deserved playing time. If they went to other teams, for sure they start right away. It's just because they're in the Shock, they didn't get playing time. So, and that also takes a very mental toll on our coaches and just everybody involved. So, we thought it's better to start small, and then obviously, budget constraints as well. So starting small and then expanding from there if need be. That's probably the play right now in our in the esports winter.
Sure. Now, what's the scaling range? Because theoretically speaking, and it's maybe the full Korean roster is sort of like a downside to this, because the visa acquisition process takes a while, but also the mid-season break is pretty long, right? So is there a world where you sign additional players in the future this season?
I mean, I can't ever come to a conclusion to that statement, because I mean there's a couple times in our seasons in the past where I'm like, all right, we're not doing any trades or transitions, and then lo and behold, Ans comes back to the team, and lo and behold, last year we got Striker back. Man, I couldn't believe we got Striker back, but he came at the right time. He came at the right time. We didn't plan any of that, but it just worked out, I mean, big brain to our to 9K. He's like, I think Reaper meta is gonna come, and we're like, lo and behold, we got Striker back. But I'm not sure what's gonna happen in terms of roster. I guess it all depends on how we wrap up the last couple weeks, and how things go at Midseason Madness. But we're always open to conversations. I've always been open to trades and whatnot. But I mean, it doesn't mean that we're gonna make trades or whatnot. It's just something that I've always been open to, because going back to the previous statement, The expectations for this team, even though it is a smaller team, smaller roster, smaller coaching staff, like the expectation is to win, right? Like we're not aiming anything lower than that. So we're very serious about that. And I mean, every day the conversation changes of like the color of this team, right? Which direction can we go? What can we do when we keep this? Things that, but that's always happened in every season. It's not just because we're struggling now, but every season we always talked about what are some ways we can make things better, right? So, yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, so given the expectations and I mean also the potential of the roster, are the strategies going to be equivalent to the level of lack of performance that we might see? Like, for instance, let's say the Shock doesn't qualify for the midseason, right? Or you guys lose most of the remaining matches during the first half. You get the opportunity. How radical could fans expect this to go? And for instance, one thing I could see is maybe you are breaking up the paradigm of only signing Korean players because that's the only option that you have right now in terms of like signing NA players, or you take on I don't know, like players from other teams that are sitting on the bench, and like what can fans expect?
I'd say for right now, obviously this is the roster we believe is gonna take us to the promised land. And as I mentioned, it just takes some time. Like we're kind of going through the growing pains where we do have quite a few rookies, and having rookies comes with its challenges and just different styles, just kind of combining all that. But um, yeah, like this is our first time going to full Korean roster, and like Crusty and I and 9K, we always said, hey, like whatever happens, let's always go with the mixed roster. It's just this year, with the talent pool and just everything that's available to us, with the time that's available, with just, I mean, we weren't even sure how the league was even going to commence until like a month before, right? Like the scheduling didn't come out, um, and it's just a lot of uncertainty in the air. So that's why we went with the safest approach that could also help our coaching staff, that we thought was for sure to like get us to the finals and win the whole thing. And that's kind of the method that we went with right now. So that's kind of what we're focusing on in terms of like the future of like how we're gonna build things out. Um, I'm not too sure because these guys are very young and everything. So there's a lot of ways we can take this team. So but one thing for sure is as long as we have our solid coaching staff, you can be for sure that we're always gonna build out a team that's in it to win it. So and I always say, hey, our dynasty is great, and I love celebrating our um, previous championships and accolades and whatnot. And just to kind of throw it out there, I don't know if we'll all be around, but we have a 10-year reunion in 2029 with the first championship roster. So like I I love celebrating things, but I'm also about like new beginnings, new challenges. So I told Proper, Finn, and our coaching staff for this new season, I'm like, hey, like last year was great, but let's not be satisfied with second place, and hey, let's try to like make a new dynasty. Like let's try to make a new dynasty that might even surpass the previous ones. Like let's try to keep reaching for excellence. So that's one thing the fans can always look to see.
I think you're, I mean, just based on accolades, you're rightfully confident in your coaching staff. They're the most winning coaching staff of Overwatch League history. The thing that fans seem to be criticizing the coaching staff for is the decision to rotate a lot of players on roles that they have overlap in. It's not just the main tank role, that even though that's probably the big one that's being called out in terms of Max and Junbin, who, as you said, they cover all the tanks, but there doesn't seem to be a separation in that. We heard some justifications there. And then there's also seemingly a rotation on the DPS roles, because both of your DPS players are pretty flexible, but not everyone is proper. Not everyone, can just pick up stuff and be like a top 5 player on that particular role, and
For
that
sure.
some fans have voiced issues with or concerns that Hee-sung might be, you know, drawing the short end of the stick in that exchange of the constant rotation. So, do you think that's an overblown concern?
Um, it's I wouldn't say it's a concern because Crusty, I mean, I think the community calls it the Crusty crack pipe. Where yeah, we've seen it. We had Super on Genji at one point. We had Violet on DPS. And it's just obviously I don't know what's inside Krusty's head, but for example, we had Choi and Nevix. They swapped roles back in our 2019, and especially when we lost to Atlanta, they knocked us into losers bracket. Choi and Nevix, they kind of studied off each other, and when one player was sitting out and was able to study like things in a new perspective, it gave Choi a new perspective on how to approach or how to use Sigma. So I would say that's kind of something similar that's happening like now within our roles where maybe we give this guy a break, let him just kind of observe and see how this other guy approaches it, whether it's an aggressive style, passive style. But it's not one of those things where, hey, we're panicking, so we need to swap someone onto that. It's more of, hey, like things are a little bit rough. It's not working out like completely. Let's try to change perspectives a little bit. And let's see if like his aggressiveness would work on this type of hero. So there's a lot of kind of theory crafting that goes along with those compositions with different players. But I wouldn't say it's one of those things like we gotta be worried about. It's one of those things where it's just experience, and this kind of goes back to my original point. We just kind of need time to kind of just mesh it out well, because Shock's never been a team that's always like came out firing. I mean, except for last year, but last year was the inaugural season for Overwatch 2, so that's a little bit different. But I mean, like I would say Shock's always been very slow start, and then we kind of build things from there.
It sounds like your concern meter is relatively low at this point. I mean, to be fair, if this was still stages, we'd be just after the first stage, I guess. Like, yes, Shock always starts pretty slow. Also, other teams like Dallas Fuel always start relatively slow, right? Are you deep in concern, or like what's your concern meter out of 1 out of 5? Let's say 1 to 5.
I mean, watching the games, I always get so concerned when things aren't going perfectly because I mean, Overwatch is such an imperfect game, but as for me, who sometimes kind of likes things to be done perfectly, which is why I mean I'll butt heads with coaching staff or whoever it is sometimes, but um, I mean I'm always concerned. Andy's always concerned when he watches it, but I mean yeah, that's just kind of my whole approach to the game. But in terms of just like big picture wise, I mean I know like we're in great hands. Time and time again, our coaching staff has always proven that. And also, you know, we do have players that are all used to winning before, that are all like winners. They've all had championships before, whether it's in contenders, whatever leagues that they come from. But everyone's got like that winning mentality. And um, if I had a bunch of players that are, you know what, we're not doing too well, we're gonna give up, then obviously my concern meter would be through the roof. I probably wouldn't even be doing an interview with you, to be, if I'm being quite honest. But yeah, these are just growing pains. So, and we're used to it.
For sure. Now, I guess as a last question, I think it is fair to perceive this moment in time as the highest concern meter for Shock fans because they're not
Yes.
used to the situation to that degree. Maybe it also has something to do with the compartmentalization of the seasons with only 2 stages, but it feels like you, for the first time after season 1, have a moment where there's a lot of eyes on you and a lot of pressure to improve. So, what would you like your fans to know about this moment in time?
Yeah. I mean, our fans have a lot of expectations of us, which totally very fair. I would too, and especially new fans that were a part of us last year. You know, doesn't matter what type of fan you are. There's always this expectations of the shock, and I think we're kind of in that situation in 2021 where we came from a back-to-back, and everyone was like assuming, oh, this is gonna be a three-peat team. Like on paper they got everybody and everything, but we started off really rough. Um, and I mean, that whole year was rough, but we did make it to playoffs, and then I mean, unfortunately, we got fourth place, but it was still a lot better than where what people thought we would be doing. Um, but what I can say though is like there's a lot of experiences that Crusty and 9K went through throughout those years, and then also like we've had a lot of great players, but we've also never had a player like Proper before, and I mean, yeah, he's not having his MVP performance just because we're not in those winning situations. Um, but we do have the talent. I mean, we're definitely great on paper. Um, and Shock fans just got to know, like, we've been in these situations before. And it's okay to be upset because, like, we're not winning, but we're always in it for the long run. And anything good comes, you just got to have some patience. And I know like the announcement or anything might not be the announcement people were looking for, like the whole instant gratification where it's like, oh man, they got this player, like yeah, like this is gonna solve Shock's problems, but it definitely goes beyond more than that. And one thing though is like I don't think any coaches in the league work as hard. I mean, I'm not saying no one works as hard, but I'm saying like our coaches are definitely up to par in terms of like putting in the hours, actually caring about our players and just caring about our fans in terms of winning. So I know the results aren't what our fans want right now, but I can tell you that we are definitely putting in the work and we're always thinking every day. And we're not okay with these losses, so I don't want people to be like, "Oh, Shock gave up this season." It's like, no, I think even even we come mid because even like 2019 stage one, we were like 4-3 or something, and then we made it to the stage finals, and then we ended up being very dominant. So things just take time, and one thing for sure is our coaches always figure that out. So yeah, just hope the fans can be a little patient, but definitely understand the criticism though. So yeah.
Sweet. Then thank you for the interview and best of luck in preparation for the next matches.
Thank you, Scott.